Good evening. I'm Nima and this is Forum Daily for Monday, January 30th. We begin our newscast tonight in Ottawa as a new year in federal politics kicks off today. MPs return to the House of Commons to take their seats for the first session of 2023. The economy will be top of mind for parliamentarians, and the Prime Minister says that his government will be focused on the cost of living. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre plans to focus on trying to get the government to rein in spending, while Jagmeet Singh says that the New Democrats plan to push the Liberals to fulfill the terms of their mutual support agreement and roll out the planned expansion of federal dental care. Meanwhile, the federal government is saying a variety of factors are to blame for their failure to spend a budgeted total of $38 billion in the most recent fiscal year. The promised cash had been earmarked for such things as new military equipment and support for veterans, but they say much of the money remains available for future years. The unspent funds also played a big part in the Liberal government posting a smaller than expected deficit in the year ending March 31st, 2022. Well, the deadline to complete Rogers' acquisition of Shaw Communications has been extended from tomorrow to February 17th. All parties involved in the deal, Rogers, Shaw, the Shaw Family Living Trust, and Quebecor, agreed to the extension. And if approved, the deal would see Rogers acquire Shaw. This while Quebecor subsidiary Videotron will acquire Shaw's Freedom Mobile wireless business to offset competition concerns. All right, turning to a new survey by KPMG of more than 1,000 Canadians who self-identify as Black. It finds that 90% feel that their employers made progress addressing anti-Black racism last year. Almost 60% feel their employers' efforts to hire more Black staffers improved. This while 54% said efforts to promote more Black people into leadership roles was also better. But 77% are concerned that a recession will hurt the career and promotion prospects of their Black and racialized colleagues harder than others. Canadian experts and advocates are weighing in on the case of 5 officers who beat a Black man to death during a traffic stop in Memphis, Tennessee. They say the firing and charging of those officers suggests that there's been a societal progress in holding police accountable, but they also argue that it highlights the need for more institutional change, such as the need for all officers to wear body cameras. The Quebec government is calling for the firing of the federal government's newly appointed special representative to combat Islamophobia if she won't resign herself. Secularism Minister Jean-François Roberge says Amira El-Gawabi co-wrote a 2019 opinion piece in the Ottawa Citizen. It links anti-Muslim sentiment to Quebec's Bill 21, which bans some government employees from wearing religious symbols at work. Now, Mr. Roberge says Ms. El-Gawabi needs to apologize, but last week she tweeted that her opinion piece was about a poll, indicating that a strong majority of Quebecers with negative views of Islam supported the bill. All right, moving to Alberta now, where the government is objecting to the federal government's plan to extend eligibility for medically assisted death to people whose sole underlying condition is a mental illness. Premier Daniel Smith's office is against the government proceeding without Alberta's agreement. It says the province is consulting experts about the potential effects that expanding eligibility would have on its healthcare system. The expansion of eligibility is due to take effect in March. Well, there won't be any classes today at Memorial University in Newfoundland. More than 800 faculty members went out on strike at midnight after talks with the university's administration reached an impasse. The faculty union says the university has barely budged on key issues after more than a year of bargaining. Memorial says its latest contract offer contains substantial improvements in salary, benefits, and enhanced parental leave. Back in Ontario, a state funeral was held in Toronto for former Lieutenant Governor David Onley. Mr. Onley, a champion of disability rights, died at the age of 72 earlier this month. Mr. Onley used a motorized scooter throughout his life after contracting polio as a child. Current Lieutenant Governor Elizabeth Dowdeswell says Mr. Onley used his status to raise awareness and break down barriers for other disabled people. Nearby, the city of Mississauga remembers a woman who developed a legacy of feisty advocacy during more than 3 decades as mayor. Hazel McCallion died yesterday morning after a brief bout with pancreatic cancer at the age of 101. She was known affectionately as Hurricane Hazel. She earned the respect from politicians from across the political spectrum during her long tenure as mayor. All right, up next, we take a look at the major issues as Parliament sits for the first time in 2023. Forum Daily will be right back after the break, so stay tuned. The first session of Parliament in 2023 kicked off today with inflation, the economy, and health care in the spotlight. The NDP say they plan to push the governing Liberals to fulfill the terms of their supply and confidence agreement, such as the planned expansion of federal dental care. The Tories are set to take aim at the spending habits of the Trudeau government, while the Liberals say they will focus on tackling the high cost of living. Well, with us now to discuss the return of Parliament and its priorities is Dr. Lydia Miljan, political science professor at the University of Windsor. Dr. Miljan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thanks, Nima. Nice to be here.
So Parliament seems to be resuming with a lot on the docket. What do you see being the top priority when it comes to federal spending?
Well, clearly, all eyes are going to be on the inflation numbers. I mean, I think Canadians are very hard hit by just the cost of everything. You go to the grocery store and you feel like you need a second mortgage just to get a head of lettuce. And so I think that that's something that's top of mind for everyone. Clearly, we're still having interest rate hikes. And again, that's making affordability. So certainly affordability across the board, but in particular, housing is going to be top of mind, I think, for a lot of the political players.
Now, the Liberal government seems to be being pulled in both directions when it comes to federal spending, when it comes to the NDP's concerns and the Tories. How do you see the Liberals addressing these opposing concerns here?
Well, I mean, from today's appearance at the House of Commons, I think that there's just a lot of nice words that the federal government has, and a lot will have to depend on what they're going to do with the budget. Clearly, their supply and confidence agreement does hinge on them fulfilling the promises that they made to the NDP, but at the same time, they do realize and recognize that they've got to put a handle on debt and deficit spending. And they're also getting huge pressure from the provinces. So they're in a very difficult spot. How do you make sure that, the things that Canadians want, which I think that we can all agree on is good health care, and that could include dental and pharmacare. But at the same time, how do you make sure that you don't make the cost of living any worse, and that you're not just spending money or printing money, which creates inflationary pressures?
Now, it seems to be quite a balancing act when it comes to these spending concerns. Now, let's touch a little bit more on the rising cost of living and the looming concerns of a recession in Canada. How do you expect the government to address this amid these spending pressures?
Well, obviously, the finance minister is going to try to downplay any concerns about the economy. And in fact, she hinted that today at the House of Commons in question period. She was saying, is it responsible for the Conservatives to keep on talking, down about the Canadian economy? But she does have to be mindful that there is, predictions that we are going to be in a recession. And I think that's in part what the Bank of Canada wants, right? Governor of Bank of Canada a few months ago said that, employment was too high and the cost of living was too much, and so that he was putting up interest rates to cool down the economy. Well, cooling down the economy does cause for recession. The hope, I think, for the Bank of Canada is that you have what's called a soft landing, that you don't have really extreme highs or extreme lows, and that you can sort of smooth out the pressures that we're having right now. It's unclear whether or not the Bank of Canada or even the government of Canada can do anything about our major issues, which tend to be supply chain related, and just tend to be around the global economy, and just the fact that there are a lot of people pursuing a lot of goods that we just can't simply get into our country.
All right, and jumping to healthcare spending, that's a major concern, especially among the premiers. The PM will be meeting with premiers next week to discuss an increase in federal healthcare spending. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you expect from this meeting and how this would likely impact Parliament overall?
Well, I mean, obviously, the provinces have been asking for an increase in spending for quite some time. We have to remember that health is provincial responsibility. And the only reason why the federal government has a say in it is because initially they promised to fund 50-50 for hospitals. They're not even anywhere near that. And I think, all the premiers are asking is, for them to help support this increasingly expensive part of government. We have huge wait times in our hospitals. It's difficult to have have primary care physicians, there's doctor burnout, nurses burnout. This is a massive issue, and everyone agrees that you just can't throw money at it, but at the same time, you do need resources to help train new professionals and get people the care that they desperately want and need.
Sounds like a lot to keep our eyes on. Dr. Miljan, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily News.
My pleasure, Nima.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And after the break, we're going to take a look at the rising threat of title fraud and how you can protect yourself. More cases of people impersonating homeowners continue to pop up, especially in provinces like Ontario and BC. To unpack the issue, we're going to be speaking with Mr. Brian King of the King International Advisory Group. And after that, of course, we're going to be taking a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Title fraud is on the rise in Canada as more cases of people impersonating homeowners and tenants continue popping up in provinces like Ontario and British Columbia. Now, these fraudsters then go to the bank to borrow money against the target house, get approved, register the mortgage, and of course, steal the money. Brian King, the president and CEO of King International Advisory Group, says his firm received 30 such claims in Ontario. Now, this includes 6 cases where con artists posed as homeowners and listed properties for sale. And he's not alone. The president of First Canadian Title Company Limited says the firm had seen a definite rise in title fraud. Well, joining us now to give us his advice on how to protect yourself from title fraud is Mr. Brian King himself. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we gave a brief overview of what title fraud could look like, but can you walk us through this process and just how these fraudsters are able to evade regulatory bodies and successfully fool big banks?
Well, firstly, they work in a group, and they're very good at what they do. The fraudsters, of course, what they're going to do is they're going to impersonate the homeowner. What they do, though, is they target a property first. In other words, they're looking for a property with a high equity value. In other words, no first mortgage or a very low first mortgage. And once they have that information, which they can usually get from land titles, what they'll do then is then start researching the homeowner and gathering information that they require to produce and manufacture identification, such as driver's licenses, citizenship cards, or passports. They basically need 2 pieces of ID, and they're very good at it. So much so that once they have that identification created, they can then impersonate the homeowner and fool the lawyers, the real estate agents, everybody along the line in the process.
That's some really shocking information there, Mr. King. So what do you think is contributing to this rise in title fraud cases in Canada?
Well, I think, when it comes to British Columbia and Ontario, the high price of homes. So we've seen a huge escalation in recent years of the value of homes. So it's not atypical to see a homeowner who's owned a property for a lengthy period of time to have a very high equity value in the home, and that's what they're looking for, because they want to get as much money as they can.
Now, things have been really shifting following the pandemic, especially the shift to a sort of virtual communication. So how has all of this affected the issue of title fraud in Canada?
Well, it actually escalated. What we saw when the pandemic hit was a move from in-person signings to virtual signings. So that allowed the fraudsters a little bit of freedom, in so much that nobody was meeting with the homeowners personally. And of course, they're not handling and touching the identification, they're being shown it virtually. And so what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic was an increase in what we call mortgage frauds. It's a little different than your total title transfer. This is where they would put a large mortgage on the property. Of course, they've impersonated you now. So what they then do is they open a bank account under your name. It's only used for this transaction. And they have the funds from that mortgage directed to that bank account, and then they take that money, and it's usually gone within a 7-day period and transferred to either cryptocurrency or gold, and then in some instances moved right out of the country.
All right, Mr. King, a quick 1 minute left here in this segment, but what kind of steps can our viewers take, our homeowner viewers can take to protect their properties?
One of the things, one of the biggest pieces of advice I give, especially for homeowners that purchased their homes prior to 2000, mid 2000s, when title insurance wasn't very vogue, is to get title insurance, because title insurance protects you. The title insurer will then deal with the aftermath of this. And but really, once these are very organized fraud groups, and once they've targeted a particular home, it's very hard for you to stop them, because they're totally impersonating you, and you're not aware. You're not usually aware for several months later.
All right, Mr. King, we appreciate your time today on Forum Daily. Thank you for your advice.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break, where we're going to be taking a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world. The WHO says COVID-19 is still a global health emergency. At least 59 are dead after a major suicide bombing in Pakistan. A sixth officer is disciplined over the Tyree Nichols arrest in Memphis, Tennessee. And Hockey Hall of Fame great Bobby Hull dies at 84. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back after a short break. Stay with us. The head of the World Health Organization says COVID-19 is still a global health emergency. But Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus says a WHO panel has found that the pandemic may be nearing an inflection point where higher levels of immunity can lower virus-related deaths. Dr. Tedros is urging everyone in at-risk groups to be fully vaccinated. He's also calling for an increase in testing and early use of antivirals, an expansion of lab networks, and a fight against misinformation about the pandemic. Tragedy in Pakistan, where a suicide bombing at a mosque inside a police compound in Peshawar has killed at least 59 people. Officials say 150 others were wounded and that most of the casualties were police officers. The bomber set off the explosives when more than 300 worshippers were praying inside the mosque and others were approaching. A commander for the Pakistani Taliban claimed responsibility on Twitter. And the bloodshed continues in Israel. Officials with the Palestinian Health Ministry says Israeli forces killed a Palestinian man in a flashpoint city in the West Bank. They say the 26-year-old man was shot in Hebron. It is often a center of clashes between the Israeli military and Palestinians. Violence has spiked in recent days. An Israeli military raid on a militant stronghold in the West Bank city of Jenin last week killed 10, most of them being militants. A Palestinian shooting attack in an East Jerusalem Jewish settlement killed 7 Israelis. All right, turning to the United States, where Memphis police say a sixth officer has been disciplined but not fired for his involvement in the brutal beating and arrest of Tyree Nichols earlier this month. Officer Preston Hemphill was relieved of duty shortly after the arrest. Mr. Nichols' family and others are closely watching developments surrounding his killing. They have been waiting for word of additional disciplinary action against officers who stood around at the scene but have not been fired or charged. 5 former officers are facing second-degree murder charges. All right, turning to the latest in military aid to Ukraine, as France and Australia have announced plans to jointly produce and send several thousand 155mm artillery shells to the country. The first deliveries are expected by the end of March. Monday's multi-million-dollar joint announcement was made by the defense ministers from Australia and France. It also appeared aimed at sending a signal that the two countries have overcome a damaging dispute over submarines. Well, amid the fallout from the invasion of Ukraine, Europe is cutting more energy ties with Russia. A ban on imports of diesel fuel and other products made from crude oil in Russian refineries takes effect on February 5th. The goal is to stop feeding Russia's war chest with energy payments, but it's not that simple. Diesel prices have already jumped since the war started on February 24th, 2022, and they could rise again. The ban is likely to be accompanied by a price cap, and the uncertainty of how that will work has markets on edge. Well, in the latest news on job cuts, Dutch consumer electronics and medical equipment maker Philips says it's cutting 6,000 jobs worldwide over the next 2 years. The company made the announcement as it revealed a net loss of $1.7 billion US in 2022. The job losses come on top of a reduction of 4,000 staff announced in October. The Amsterdam-based Philips has seen a hit by a worldwide recall of sleep apnea machines and economic headwinds. Moving to Australia now, where a mining corporation has apologized for losing a highly radioactive capsule. They lost it somewhere over a 1,400-kilometer stretch of Western Australia. Authorities are searching for the tiny but dangerous substance. It's believed to have fallen off a truck while being transported between a desert mine site and the city of Perth earlier this month. The capsule measures less than a centimeter across. Authorities warn that it could cause skin burns and that prolonged exposure could cause cancer. Well, the first player in NHL history to score more than 50 goals in a single season has died. Hockey Hall of Famer Bobby Hull was 84. Over a pro career that spanned 23 years, Bobby Hull played for the NHL's Chicago Blackhawks and Hartford Whalers, as well as the World Hockey Association's Winnipeg Jets. He and Chicago teammate Stan Mikita helped popularize the curved hockey stick blade in the NHL. And the Kansas City Chiefs will battle the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs earned a 23-20 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals in the AFC title game on Sunday. It came after Philadelphia beat the wounded San Francisco 49ers 31-7 in the NFC Championship game. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.